I never thought ambition could be dangerous until I realized how it had changed him. Alex and I had been inseparable once. Not in that superficial way people call love on social media, but the kind of bond where your dreams thread together, quietly, without anyone noticing. We moved to the city together, two young professionals convinced we were destined for more than ordinary lives. At first, it felt like a partnership. We shared ideas, late-night plans, small victories, and the occasional failure. But somewhere along the line, ambition became a weapon for him, and love became collateral. He wasn't the type to shout or make scenes. His charm was subtle, a smile, a compliment, a tone that made you think he was generous while quietly convincing you to bend. I didn't notice at first, or maybe I ignored it, because love tends to blind you to slow erosion. The first time I realized the shift wasn't a single moment. It was a series of almost invisible steps. He started claiming credit for ideas I'd presented. He positioned himself as the visionary, while I became the operational support. People noticed him, praised him, trusted him. I stepped back, thinking it didn't matter. But ambition, unchecked, doesn't forgive hesitation. One evening, he came home with an investment proposal he'd secured. He was glowing, triumphant, telling me how he'd impressed a group of potential backers. I congratulated him genuinely, though a cold thought nudged me at the edges of my mind. This was our plan, our idea. He hadn't just presented it, he'd taken ownership. I told them it was my vision, he said casually, leaning back with his hands behind his head. They loved it. The words didn't sting at first. They whispered. Then they sank. I didn't confront him. I didn't shout. I smiled, hugged him, pretended to be supportive. Because I realized something crucial. People like him rarely notice quiet observation. They assume compliance is submission, not preparation. Over the next few months, I started to notice patterns. Every major opportunity he pursued, it came from something we had built together. Every recognition he received, he positioned himself as the architect, the genius, the unstoppable force. Meanwhile, I became the ghost behind the accomplishments, the person who kept the engine running while he took the credit. And the more he rose, the more reckless he became. He assumed loyalty was permanent. He assumed forgiveness was infinite. He assumed I would continue to stand in the background, quietly supporting his ascent while my own contributions remained invisible. That was his first mistake. Because ambition is addictive, but patience can be deliberate. I began documenting everything. Every conversation, every decision, every promise. Not out of paranoia, out of strategy. I started building my own structure, quietly, deliberately, in parallel with his rise. Every email was saved. Every proposal was time-stamped. Every financial detail carefully tracked. The quiet observation phase had begun. I didn't let anyone know what I was doing. Not friends, not family, not even colleagues. He believed I was disengaged, still supportive, still loyal, still the partner he could mold. He didn't see the patience, the calculation, the preparation beneath the surface. One night, he came home boasting about a new deal, a lucrative property investment he claimed to have secured on his own. He bragged for hours, unaware that I had already traced every meeting, every contract, every interaction. The deal was not only built on resources he claimed were his alone, it was also a liability he hadn't accounted for, a detail I quietly flagged to myself. I smiled while listening. I let him speak. Because the longer he took credit, the closer he moved toward his own unraveling. And that, I realized, was the first step of a much longer plan. Ambition had blinded him. Arrogance had made him careless. And I, who once loved him, had become something entirely different, an observer with the power to wait. I didn't know exactly when it would end, whether the payoff would come in months or years, but I knew it would. Because patience, when combined with preparation, can be a force more devastating than any betrayal. As the months passed, Alex's arrogance only grew. He moved faster, took bolder risks, and spoke louder about accomplishments he hadn't truly earned. People admired him, investors, colleagues, even friends, and he soaked up every compliment, as though the recognition were oxygen. I watched quietly. It wasn't easy to sit back. Some nights, The frustration burned in my chest, a weight I had to breathe through. But I couldn't act rashly. This wasn't about venting anger or proving a point impulsively. This was about strategy. Every misstep he made, every overlooked detail, every overconfidence-fueled error, was being recorded, mentally, physically, financially. He began making changes to our joint ventures without consulting me. A property deal here, a financial maneuver there, all presented as his ideas. Even when I raised questions politely, he brushed them aside. "You worry too much," he said once, waving off my concern. "I know what I'm doing." I smiled inside. Yes, he did. But he didn't know *everything star. I started monitoring his deals in detail. Bank transfers, contracts, partner communications, every detail, every clause. I discovered patterns. Where he cut corners, where he relied too heavily on charm over contracts, where he assumed loyalty would protect him from scrutiny. Then came the first close call. One of his investments began to falter. A partner raised questions, requesting clarification on responsibilities that Alex hadn't formally documented. He called me in, flustered but trying to keep composure. "Can't you just fix this quietly?" he asked. "I've already prepared everything," I said calmly, handing him the documents he needed. He glanced at them, then frowned. "Where did you?" "I kept track," I said simply. He didn't push further. He couldn't. And that, I realized, was the first moment he felt a flicker of doubt about his infallibility. It was exhilarating in a quiet, almost imperceptible way. I wasn't trying to hurt him, not yet. I was simply setting the foundation. Every moment he flaunted his power, he strengthened the structure I was quietly building beneath it. Every boast, every claim of genius, every overconfidence-laden decision, all of it would be essential later. During this time, I also began securing my own financial independence. I opened accounts, created legal structures, started minor investments under my own name. Nothing flashy. Nothing traceable to the narrative Alex was spinning. Just preparation. And slowly, deliberately, I began planting seeds of doubt in others' minds. Not accusations, not confrontations, subtle reminders. I prepared the reports, I'd say in passing. All contracts are documented and cross-verified. Gentle, factual statements that contrasted sharply with Alex's verbal bravado. People noticed. Investors started asking questions. Colleagues began double-checking details. And Alex, unaware of the shift, interpreted the scrutiny as a temporary nuisance rather than a warning sign. One evening, after a long day of meetings, he came home exhausted, but smiling as if he'd conquered the world. He poured himself a drink and laughed, talking about a lucrative new deal he'd closed. I listened, quietly noting every word, every partner, every clause, every risk. "You should be proud of me," he said, grinning. I smiled faintly. "I am." "Not really," he added, sensing some restraint. "You're too quiet lately. Something on your mind?" "No," I said. "Just thinking ahead." He laughed, shook his head, and went to the balcony, looking over the city lights. I sat there too, pretending to scroll through emails, but in reality, I was calculating timelines, consequences, and opportunities. Ambition can blind people, but it also makes them predictable. Every risk Alex took, every miscalculation, every oversight, I catalogued it carefully. And slowly, I realized, his greatest vulnerability wasn't a competitor or a bad deal. It was himself star. By the end of that week, one small financial discrepancy had started to grow. Nothing catastrophic, not yet, but enough to create tension in his circles. And I, who had always been beside him, quietly ensured that the documentation for the discrepancy existed. Clear, undeniable, and mine to reveal if needed. I wasn't rushing. I wasn't gloating. I was preparing the board, the partners, and, ultimately, Alex, for the moment when reality would demand acknowledgement. Because the real power of quiet observation, I realized, is that it allows you to strike without warning, and without anyone understanding what actually happened. And I was ready. By now, Alex had begun to show cracks. Subtle ones at first, missed calls, delayed responses, a growing irritation whenever someone asked for verification. He was still charming, still magnetic, still everyone's favorite visionary. But the careful balance he had maintained for years was tipping, and he didn't notice it. I did. One morning, a minor partner called me directly. Alex had promised them a report by Friday, and it hadn't arrived. Normally, he would have delegated it to me quietly, assuming I'd fix it, and presented the results as his own. But this time, he had skipped the chain of communication. I wasn't consulted until the partner insisted. I prepared the report meticulously and sent it along, carbon copying Alex without comment. Later that day, he cornered me in the office. "You went around me," he said, his tone low, controlled, but with a flicker of annoyance. "I responded to the partner," I said. Calmly, factually, without asking me first. "I assumed you'd want the information delivered." He stared at me a moment. Then he smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. "Careful," he said. I nodded. "I always am." That was all it took to start a subtle shift. Over the next few weeks, I noticed his control slipping. He micromanaged some projects, ignored others, and made promises he couldn't keep. Investors started asking more detailed questions. Staff began relying on me for clarity, often before consulting him. The more he assumed I would always stay silent, the more visible I became. And the more visible I became, the more mistakes he made. One evening, I discovered something that would later prove pivotal. A financial discrepancy, minor on the surface, but significant if examined carefully. It wasn't catastrophic, but it highlighted a chain of assumptions Alex had made about revenue streams, partner commitments, and personal guarantees. In short, he had overextended. I didn't act immediately. I documented everything, cross-checked every number, and noted the partners involved. I prepared a complete paper trail, clear, factual, irrefutable. The next morning, I noticed him pacing in his office, distracted, a little more irritable than usual. He was trying to manage multiple deals simultaneously, juggling appearances, and keeping everyone convinced of his genius. He didn't see me quietly watching from the doorway, silently noting every misstep, every overreach, every moment of arrogance that would eventually be his undoing. Then came the first real close call. A partner scheduled a sudden review meeting. Alex wasn't prepared. He had assumed compliance from everyone else. I had all the information, fully documented, ready to present if necessary. But I didn't intervene. Not yet. I let him stumble, let him misstate facts, let his charm do its work, and quietly ensured that every error he made was traceable. He survived that meeting. Barely. But the seeds of doubt had been planted. From that point, he started reaching out to me more, asking for advice, clarification, reassurance. And every time he did, I was careful to respond factually, without embellishment, without interpretation. People started noticing. Investors, colleagues, even friends began to see the cracks. They didn't blame him, not yet, but they were asking questions, verifying, double-checking. And he didn't realize the questions were slowly building a framework. A framework where accountability would eventually have to be assigned. I started noticing small moments that terrified him, though he would never admit it. A partner glanced at me during a tense conversation. A junior staff member copied me on an email chain he thought was private. An investor asked for documentation he hadn't prepared. Every one of these moments was subtle, almost invisible to anyone who didn't know what to look for. But I did. And I kept notes. By now, I was no longer just observing. I was preparing the structure of his eventual undoing, quietly, methodically, without anyone suspecting. The beauty of psychological and financial strategy is that it doesn't need confrontation. It doesn't need dramatic explosions. It only needs patience. And patience, in a situation like this, is far more powerful than any shout or argument. Alex had no idea that every boast, every overconfidence, every misdetail, every assumption about loyalty, was being catalogued. That every misstep was a brick in the wall that would eventually surround him. And by the time he realized, it would be too late. Ambition does something dangerous when it's threatened. It doesn't retreat. It accelerates. Alex began moving faster, taking on bigger risks, stacking deals on top of each other as if momentum alone could drown out doubt. He talked more, promised more, committed to timelines that left no margin for error. From the outside, it looked impressive. From the inside, it was unstable. I started seeing the same pattern repeat, a bold claim, followed by a scramble to make reality match it. He leaned on reputation instead of preparation, confidence instead of contracts. And slowly, people began to feel it. Meetings became tense. Conversations that once ended with handshakes now ended with follow-up emails and just to confirm messages. His name still opened doors, but those doors didn't stay open as long. One afternoon, an investor asked for a detailed breakdown of a project Alex had been hyping for months. Not a pitch deck, actual numbers. Forecasts. Contingencies. Alex forwarded the request to me with a single line. Asterisk, can you pull something together quickly? Asterisk. Quickly. I stared at the screen longer than necessary. I could have rushed it. Smoothed assumptions. Framed optimism as certainty. Instead, I prepared exactly what existed. No embellishment. No cushioning. When Alex reviewed it, his expression tightened. This doesn't look confident, he said. It looks accurate, I replied. He sighed, rubbing his temples. We can't send this. We can, I said calmly. Or we can send something that won't hold up. He hesitated, then overruled me. I'll handle it, he said. He sent his own version. The investor responded 2 days later with a request for clarification. Then another. Then a request for documentation. Alex's confidence faltered. He came home late that night, agitated, pacing the living room. They're getting difficult, he said. Overly cautious. They're protecting themselves, I replied. He stopped pacing and looked at me. Whose side are you on? I'm on reality's side. That answer didn't satisfy him. He started guarding information now. Holding meetings without me. Making decisions without documentation. Relying on verbal assurances. It was a mistake. Because every time he excluded me, someone else filled the gap, and they weren't nearly as careful. Errors multiplied. Small ones at first. A missed clause. An assumption about funding timing. A misunderstood obligation. I caught what I could. Quietly corrected what wouldn't draw attention. But some mistakes needed to exist. Because correction without consequence only feeds arrogance. Then came the moment I knew the situation had shifted permanently. A financial institution flagged one of his ventures for review. Routine. On paper. Not routine in reality. Alex tried to play it off, but I could see the strain. He asked me for help preparing statements, projections, explanations. I helped. Selectively. I provided clean records. Transparent timelines. Documented decisions. What I didn't provide was cover. The review didn't end badly. But it didn't end cleanly either. Conditions were imposed. Oversight increased. Future funding slowed. Alex took it personally. They're overreacting, he said bitterly. They don't see the big picture. They see risk, I replied. He slammed his laptop shut. You sound like them. I said nothing. Because I was starting to realize something unsettling. This wasn't just about ambition anymore. It was about identity. Alex didn't just want success. He needed it to confirm who he believed himself to be. And anything that questioned that belief felt like an attack. That made him dangerous, not to others, but to himself. Late one evening, I overheard him on the phone in the next room. His voice was low, urgent. No, I'll fix it, he said. Just give me time. Time was the one thing he no longer had. I checked the numbers after he went to bed. Cross-referenced accounts. Reviewed commitments. The picture was clear. He wasn't insolvent. But he was exposed. One misstep. One partner pulling back. One demand for accountability. And everything would unravel. I closed my laptop slowly, my heart steady. This was no longer hypothetical. The structure was in place. The pressure was applied. The system was ready. All that remained was the moment when ambition finally outran control. And when that happened, there would be no shouting. No confrontation. Just consequences. By the time Alex realized something was wrong, it was already everywhere. Not loud. Not obvious. Just present. He became reactive. Hyper-aware of tone, of pauses, of who was copied on emails. He reread messages before sending them, then rewrote them again, trying to sound confident without sounding careless. That kind of effort is exhausting. And exhaustion leads to mistakes. He started waking up earlier, staying out later, drinking more, talking less, except when he was talking too much, explaining things no one had questioned yet. That's how I knew the pressure was finally inside him. One night, he came home furious. "They went behind my back," he said, tossing his phone onto the table. "They contacted you directly." "Who?" I asked. "A partner. Asked you for clarification." "What did they ask?" He hesitated. "About timelines." I nodded. I answered. "With what?" "With what's documented." He stared at me, jaw tight. "You're enjoying this?" "No," I said. "I'm prepared for it." That word again. Prepared. It followed him now, even when I wasn't speaking. The next week, a deal collapsed. Not explosively. Quietly. A partner withdrew, citing alignment concerns. No accusations. No drama. Just a decision. Alex spiraled. He called emergency meetings. Promised revised projections. Spoke passionately about long-term vision. But passion doesn't fix exposure. The financial strain became visible. Payments delayed. Short-term borrowing increased. He started shifting money between accounts, nothing illegal, but desperate. Temporary solutions to permanent problems. I noticed everything. And I documented all of it. They asked about partner commitments. They asked about approvals, who signed what, and when. Alex answered smoothly at first. Then more slowly. Then defensively. And finally, inconsistently. That's when they turned to me. Not aggressively. Not accusingly. Just expectantly. I answered everything. I didn't editorialize. I didn't interpret. I didn't protect. I explained systems, timelines, documentation, decision paths. I showed them exactly how things worked, and where they didn't. At one point, someone paused, flipping through a report. "This projection assumes funding that isn't contractual secured," they said. Alex opened his mouth. I spoke first. "That assumption wasn't documented," I said. "It was verbal." Silence. Not shock. Recognition. That single sentence shifted the room. Because verbal confidence doesn't survive written scrutiny. They asked Alex to clarify. He tried. But explanation without evidence collapses quickly. By the end of the session, no one was angry. No one was dramatic. They didn't need to be. They had what they came for. Afterward, Alex and I waited in separate rooms. I sat quietly, hands folded, listening to the hum of the building. I felt steady. Not triumphant. Steady. Alex paced in the hallway. I could hear his footsteps, sharp and uneven. Every so often, he muttered something under his breath. He was unraveling internally, and he knew it. When they called us back in, the outcome was already shaped. They didn't frame it as punishment. They framed it as necessity. Immediate oversight. Frozen expansions. Restructuring of financial authority. Alex would step back from decision-making until stability was restored. Not removed, but contained. His face tightened as the words landed. This wasn't collapse. This was worse. This was exposure without drama. Accountability without spectacle. They asked me to remain involved, not publicly, not symbolically, but operationally. To ensure continuity. To stabilize. Alex didn't look at me. He couldn't. The announcement came days later. Carefully worded. Polished. Respectful. Strategic realignment. Focus on sustainability. Shared responsibility. Outwardly, nothing looked broken. Privately, everything had changed. Partners rerouted communication to me. Financial institutions requested my confirmations. Decisions flowed through systems instead of personalities. Alex became unnecessary. That's the most brutal realization of all. Not that you failed, but that the machine runs better without you at the center. He confronted me one final time. Not angry. Defeated. You planned this, he said quietly. I prepared for reality, I replied. He shook his head. You let me destroy myself. No, I said. I stopped fixing it for you. He laughed once. Hollow. You always were smarter. No, I said again. Just more patient. He walked away without another word. And for the first time since I'd known him, his ambition had nowhere left to go. The city didn't change after Alex stepped back. That's what struck me most. The streets were just as loud. The offices just as busy. The skyline still glittered at night like ambition itself hadn't taken a hit. Life went on. And so did the work. In the weeks that followed, things began to feel lighter. Meetings ended with decisions instead of tension. Numbers aligned. Deadlines were met without last-minute improvisation. No one announced the shift out loud, but everyone felt it. Stability has a sound. It's quiet. Alex faded slowly. At first, his name still carried weight. People spoke of him with care, with that cautious respect reserved for someone who used to matter a great deal. But without daily influence, without access to decisions, his presence thinned. Power doesn't disappear overnight. It dissolves when it's no longer needed. I stayed where I had always been, inside the structure. Not visible. Not celebrated. Trusted. Financial controls tightened. Systems stabilized. Risk flattened. For the first time in a long while, I slept deeply. Months later, I received an email from Alex. Short. Unexpected. I'm starting something new. Smaller. Slower. Thought you should know. I read it once. Then I closed it. I didn't respond. Not out of cruelty, but because some chapters don't need commentary. They just end. I ran into him one final time, much later, in a part of the city we used to dream about conquering together. He looked different. Less sharp. Less hurried. More human. We exchanged polite words. Nothing heavy. Nothing unfinished. As we parted, he hesitated. I used to think ambition was everything, he said quietly. I nodded. It is, until it isn't. He smiled faintly. You won, didn't you? I considered that. No, I said. I stopped losing. That distinction mattered. I didn't ruin him. I didn't expose him publicly. I didn't take anything that wasn't already fragile. I simply stepped out of the way and let his ambition face reality alone. And that was enough. Today, my life is quieter, stronger, grounded. I don't chase visibility. I don't confuse speed with progress. I build slowly now, deliberately, knowing exactly what holds and what doesn't. Because ambition, when paired with patience, doesn't need revenge.